waste my life. I don't wanna waste my life living in this world. It's just some things, there's no going back. You know what I'm saying?
jwoodbeats.com.
Yeah, I'm not the one with the issues. I hear you. Now here is your tissue. If I'm moving too fast, I might have to dismiss you. And it's really too bad, cause I really will miss you. But I'm not the one with the issues. I left him at church when I made it official. I murdered the curse with my own benediction. Left God in the dirt, call it death of the fiction. Superstition will be served in eviction. Competition will be left in the ditch. Oh my God, it's too damn hot in this kitchen. The fishes of men are now swimming with fishes. Oops, my bad, I guess I'm moving too vicious. Verses sold, I gotta put them on your wish list. Bless my soul, cause I'm dodging your little hit list. I guess you know, you just lost another witness.
Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go right now. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go, I'm out of here. I can do anything, fuck your opinions and energy. I finally got the epitome, my biggest hindrance was God can't do nothing but fail. Greater is me, I never needed your deity. All of this human capacity, when it gets rough, I can pick myself up and prevail. Cause I don't need anything other than people who fuck with me. Good business, it starts with good company. That's why your boy is obsessed with community. Cause greater is we can create opportunity. Doing what God never did, cause a God never could, but a people is all we need. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go, yeah. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go right now. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go.
What's up, everybody? How are you doing today? It's nice to have y'all in the chat again for another night of Bible study with an ex-pastor, where for the whole book of Exodus, and I actually said it right this time because normally I say for the whole month of Exodus, but for the whole book of Exodus, we have Jason Foe from Dragons and Genesis with us. So this is gonna be incredible. Let me get all of my announcements in. I see y'all in the chat. It's so beautiful. Man, I see Muttley, Love and Sausages, Rogue Show 296. Yes, Moonbeam Goddess. Yes. I think you filled out one of our forms recently. Welcome aboard. Yep, Alyssa. Oh, Norbert, come on now. And me. I see me in the chat. And of course, look at there. Jason's in the chat. All right, so I think this is going to be good. I think we're going to have a really good time. The book of Exodus has been amazing so far. As you can see, we're adding different things to our intro. Y'all saw the little slideshow that we had opening up. But unfortunately, I don't have the bandwidth to open it, to edit it every week. So I actually have to, I need to set up one for Bible study with an ex-pastor, and I need to set up one for Sunday shows, and I need to, for the Sunday sessions, and I need to set up one for the ex-pastor call-in show. Speaking of which, what did y'all think about this week's ex-pastor call-in show? Like, it's phenomenal. And, you know, like, I'm not trying to Donald Trump it or anything, but it's the best show in the world. I'm telling you, there's just no show like it. There's no other show out there that even comes close. This is absolutely the best show ever. But no, in all seriousness, if you haven't watched the ex-pastor call-in show, please go check it out. This past Sunday night was absolutely phenomenal. It's one of our highest viewed live shows to date. So that was just incredible. And it's just an incredible experience. And I cannot wait to get other former pastors involved with that show. And, you know, because that's how we do it over here. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider joining, connecting, or supporting this community channel or content in any way that makes sense for you. And of course, check out our merch, because it's dope, you know, and I say that every time. And also, because I have a special guest co-host, I also have to shout out his merch too, because it's kind of dope. I can't even lie. And so, of course, we'll always let him talk about that when we bring him on the call-in show via Discord. Yes. Oh, yeah. Good job, Muttley. Thank you. All right. So I think we're about ready to get started. We made it through 15 chapters. Let me get Jason from backstage. Jason, welcome aboard, man. Welcome back for another Wednesday. How are you feeling today?
I'm good, man. Wednesdays are my short days at work. I get off at 2 o'clock. It was a beautiful day, so I sat outside in the shade in like the 72-degree weather with a cool breeze. I smoked a
Ooh,
cigar and I read a book and I just chilled. And then I got here, I grabbed a quick snack, and now I'm here to do my favorite thing, which is to prattle about the Bible.
I
So,
love it. I love it, man. That is awesome. Well, we have a good night ahead of us. I am getting my little screen ready here. Oh, snap. Okay. Oh, perfect. That's beautiful. I'm using a different app tonight, which I kind of told you about, because I wanted us to be able to. Since you mentioned the New Revised Standard Version, I wanted us to get as close to that as possible. So tonight, instead of using the Blue Letter Bible, which is the app that we've typically been using since the Book of Genesis, tonight we're going to use another famous app that I used to use a lot when I was a preacher, and that was the Bible Gateway app. So
oh
we're
yeah.
going to be picking up in chapter 16. Are you familiar with the Bible Gateway app?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times, whenever I'm doing my research, I'll just like search a chapter and verse on Google, and it either brings me to Bible Gateway or Bible Hub, and I just click on whichever link pops up first, because both of those sites will give you like 30 different versions of the Bible, and you can actually like put up like a single verse and compare all the different versions and
Yes.
see, like all the differences that are in
Yep.
there. So
I
yeah,
love
it's
that.
that's really cool.
Yep, I've been Bible Hub is one that I was definitely familiar with. I do like Bible Hub because of that specific thing you just mentioned. Is that just almost by default, if you look up a verse, if there's a Bible Hub link for it, it's going to take you to this page where you have several different
Yeah,
comparisons across versions,
yeah,
and that is really helpful.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
then. Well, we're going to jump into this. I'm going to throw this on the screen so everybody can follow along with us. We are in chapter 16. We have learned so much so far. And the new tagline for Bible study with the next pastor is, in these shows, we're going to learn the Bible and laugh at the bullshit. That's pretty much where we are. And by the way, we have a shirt with that on it now. And so, you'll see that when you check into the store.
Yeah.
But let's get this
Now,
started up. Yeah, go
real
ahead.
quick,
Uh-oh.
I'm a bit confused as to why I'm here to talk
Mm,
about Exodus, because I think we actually finished.
that's right. That's
Like, go
right.
go to chapter 15 and go to the last two verses and read those for me.
Yep. Chapter 15. Oh, now I have to realize how to use this one again.
Scroll down. I think it's like 25, 26, or 26, 27, something like that. Last two verses of chapter
Yep.
15.
All right. Last two verses. It says, He said, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight and give heed to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water.
Okay, so remember how very early on we talked about how Exodus was sort of compiled in stages? And
Yes.
originally it began with the calling of the prophet, where he's chilling out there and he encounters this burning bush, and that was originally the beginning of the book of Exodus. And after that, he was sent into Egypt, and he was sent to perform four miracles: cure leprosy, turn a stick into a snake, and turn water into blood. And those three were to be performed for the benefit of the Hebrew elders, to convince
Uh,
them that he was sent by Yahweh. And then he would go to Pharaoh and kill all the firstborn Egyptians, and that would convince the Pharaoh. And after that, they would leave so that Yahweh could then introduce himself to the people, and they could engage in this land covenant with him, where he would tell them what they needed to do, and in return, they would get this land given to them. This is the end of it right here.
Wow.
In verse 26, he references the commandments that he supposedly just gave them. This is supposed to be the end of the original Exodus story. They go to this thing of water. It's contaminated. He builds this strange wooden idol. They throw it into the water. It purifies it. And then there's a scene missing in which he gives them commandments, and he outlines the whole covenant. And the reward for obeying all of this is that they'll get this promised land. And then they reference it right here. If you do these things I just now told you about, then you'll have this promised land. The end, Exodus is over. And then they went back and they added all this stuff in the very beginning about the origin story of Moses. He's this little baby, and there's this whole scene where he gets put in a basket and sent downstream that they just ripped straight out of the movie Willow. And then they're like, you know what, these miracles, what if he just does them over and over again in a bunch of different versions, and they attack Egyptian gods? And he does these things for the Hebrews, but then he also does them against the Egyptians, and they just keep killing the livestock. And then they're like, hey, what if we expand this whole covenant thing?
Yeah.
And that's what we're starting to get into now. So they deleted a very shortened, or an originally shorter version of this contract with Yahweh and this list of commandments, and which was probably 10, though may not have been the 10 we're going to be getting soon, because they had multiple versions of the 10 commandments, and they've got two versions here in Exodus. There's versions of the Psalms. There's a version in Deuteronomy which matches one of the versions in Exodus. There's a bunch of different versions of the 10 commandments. And so one of the versions would have been here, along with the thing, if you do all this, then you get your land. And then they said, well, what if we take our whole law code and we throw that in? And you end up with like over 600 different commandments, which we're going to be getting soon. But then there's a problem. Then they have him, he gets the things, he establishes the covenant, and then he has to go and do it all over again. So they went back into chapter 15, and they deleted the first time it happened. So this was originally supposed to be the end of Exodus, right here, into chapter 15.
Wow. You know what? And see, that's why I named this episode Everything Wrong with the Book of Exodus, because the fact that there are more chapters after this, this is a problem. This is problematic, but I love the fact that we're learning so much about the work that goes into pulling these stories together and trying to make them make sense. All right, then. So are you ready to jump into chapter 16?
Yeah. I was hoping I could just get out of it. But the end. Bye.
Man, I know.
I could go play video games or something.
Oh, how I miss video games. Oh, man, I need a better job. I want to get back to my PS5. Oh, I have a whole Oculus, and I have not got to play it at all. Probably within the past 6 months. Yikes. All right, so we're here, chapter 16, bread from heaven. I think like in the NASB, this is probably manna. But the whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim and came to the wilderness of Sin. I've preached this a few times, which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Okay, I'm just going to take a little deviation there. The funny thing about that is this is like prophecy, because they all die without entering the promised land, only the next generation. So he did bring them out there to die. All right, so that's just my little tidbit. I'll continue.
And this is almost verbatim a repeat of what just happened in chapter 15, only there they were dying of thirst. And it
Wow,
just keeps
that's
happening
right.
over and over again. They're like, okay, cool, Yahweh can work all these miracles, we're all set. And then they're like, oh no, something's happening. If only we were back in Egypt. And it's the whole thing. We've got to set up so Yahweh can work another miracle. It's the same way that he had to keep hardening Pharaoh's heart so he could keep attacking the Egyptians. And it's what we're seeing here.
Wow.
You have this tribulation, and then they complain against the prophets. They lament their situation. They wish they were someplace better. And then the miracle comes along, and they're like, see, that's why you don't bitch about the prophets. We know better.
Yeah.
And shame on you for wishing you were in Egypt. It was horrible over there. I mean, so what if you had, like, food and water, if you just have faith.
Yeah. Oh man, this is good. And then I think Alyssa just highlighted the aspect of the wilderness of sin, which is definitely something that I used to preach. But now hearing it on this side, it sounds like a really cool party. Sounds like Woodstock, wilderness of sin, Woodstock.
Yeah.
That should be the next Woodstock. Wilderness of sin.
It's like Burning Man or something.
Burning Man. Yes, that's it. Oh man, Burning Man and burning bushes. Well, I think that goes hand in hand either way. I think that works. All right, so verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us? And Moses said, when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard this complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah, this doesn't have the natural breaks. All right, so then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. How are you feeling so far? You want to press a few more verses, or you got something here?
Yeah. So what we're seeing right here is, your traditional, deity providing for the people. The whole purpose of the gods was to do something to help you out. I mean, if they couldn't help you out, then what good were they? And, one thing is just national prosperity. They have to provide food, shelter, safety, things like that. And that's why, when you look at stories of deities in the ancient world, there's a lot of food miracles. Just think of Jesus with his McFish sandwiches.
Yes.
You've got to make those things, okay? And this is the same thing. You're going to run around the wilderness, and Yahweh's going to give you some food. He's going to give you some quail to eat, and he's also going to give you some bread. Now, this whole thing about manna, people are like, oh, there's this manna. What is it? It's, some kind of, mystical thing. Well, this is two different things that we're seeing here. One, it's an etiological tale for this flaky tree sap that comes from the tamarisk tree. It's this tree that grows natively in the area, and it has this sap that comes out of it, and it dries up in these little flakes, and it's very nutritious, and people actually call it traveler's bread. And if you're journeying around in the area, you could just scrape some of this stuff off and eat it. And, you could supplement your diet and live off this stuff for quite a while.
Wow.
And so they're like, oh, look, the gods, they just made trees that just make this weird stuff. It's awesome. And so obviously a deity must have done it,
Yeah.
I mean, because how could you possibly get food from a tree, right?
Yeah.
And so, you've got that, okay? And then another thing is the idea that it comes out of heaven. This is sort of like the Garden of Eden story. And they're
Yes.
actually, the book of Exodus is in many ways sort of, it's kind of like reversing the whole thing of Eden. The people, they disobeyed, so they got kicked out of the promised land, and they were barred from it by an angel with a big flaming sword. Now they're being led by a column of fire back to a promised land, back to Eden.
Wow.
And Eden is now supposed to be in Jerusalem. And they used to eat the food of the gods. That was the whole purpose of the garden. It was to grow the food for the deities. And this was a common story in Near Eastern mythology.
Yeah.
And so you have these gods, they make this garden, it's got all their food and stuff growing in it. And then they need like some slave labor because they don't feel like working the ground anymore. So they like get some clay and they mold it and they throw some blood on it or some magic breath, and it turns into people. And they're like, all right, you go tend my garden because I don't feel like doing that crap anymore. And so then the people, they go and they work the garden for them, and the gods, they now have a free meal. And of course, in the stories, the people, they always steal some of the food, and then they become immortal and stuff like that, which is what happens in Eden. They get all this divine knowledge.
Yes.
So now, this is sort of a return to that. Yahweh has taken heavenly food, the food of the gods, and he's giving it to the people. And so you're gradually, step by step, getting closer and closer to that primordial ideal where people lived in paradise. You think of like a land flowing with milk and honey. Oh, okay. Milk is hard to come by. You have to get these animals, you have to raise them, and then they only produce milk after they have young. You don't just have a bunch of milk, right?
Right.
We do today, but back then it was hard to get.
Yeah.
And then honey, man, you got to fight a bunch of bees to get that stuff, okay? Honey's hard. Even today, honey is expensive.
Yep.
Even the fake honey you get at Walmart that's actually just corn syrup and flavoring, even that stuff is expensive, okay? So in the ancient world, you had to go find like a rotted tree, or in the case of the Samson story, like a dead animal with a beehive in the rib cage. And then you got to go fight the bees for it. And then, you got a little bit of honey and that's it. And so the whole purpose of, the promised land flowing with these things, it's like, these things that are once rare, you're going to have an abundance of them.
Yeah.
That's the symbolism of Eden. It's everything you want all in one place, more than you could ever need. And so that's what they're doing here. They're going back to a time when they get to walk with their deity and they get to have the food of the gods. And so that's the purpose of the manna. It's an ideological tale for this tree sap food that people ate. Yeah. And it's a return to Eden and getting their food directly from heaven.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I like that. I don't think I've ever caught the aspect of this was kind of returning back or regressing even back to this Edenic form of existence where everything is provided. I know this used to be a very popular story for me as a preacher, just talking about the miracles that God is able to work for you when you're in the wilderness of sin and all that good stuff. Served for good preaching. Sociologically, especially after looking at the preaching aspect of it, I've grown concerned with stories like this in the modern time because it definitely gets people, especially in these urban churches, it gets people attached to that, hey, there's this easier life for me that God is just going to make happen for me. And then if I just listen to his voice, he's just going to make the food jump on my plate. And I'm just like, po folk, it don't happen like that.
Right. And another thing is the idea that they have to like wander around through the wilderness in order to find the land of Canaan. That makes no sense. They had direct trade routes. I mean, there were caravans going back and forth all the time. They basically could have just walked the interstate straight there, you know. So yeah, this whole thing, you couldn't get lost. All you would do is get on the road and walk it, and you end up there. So
Yes. I
yeah,
love
but
it.
this is the whole thing. Being in the wilderness is symbolic of the Babylonian exile. It's
Mhm.
you know being sort of lost, being separated from your homeland.
Ooh,
That
yeah.
that's what this whole thing is about. It's it's more about that, being sort of detached from your national identity, which is a great deal of what the Old Testament is about. It's about forging a new national identity. So, which there's an
Man.
entire book about that. It's called Why the Bible Began by
Yes.
Jacob L. Wright. Highly recommend it. It's
Yeah.
definitely a fascinating read, and it goes into detail behind the, the psychology behind the motives for writing the Old Testament.
I love that. I love that. I'm not going to be able to type this all out, but I'll do it that way. And just to throw it on the screen here, bam, Why the Bible Began. This is recommended reading. For those of you who don't know what REC, not recreational reading. Well, it could be recreational reading. But Why the Bible Began. Make sure y'all check that out. All right. Let's pick up. I think we're at verse 13, and the quails are getting ready to come. So in the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as the frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer per person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it became wormy and rotten. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning, they gathered it as much as they needed. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. That's interesting. Bread melting in the sun. Okay. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. And all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning." So they put it aside until morning, just as Moses commanded them. And it did not rot, and there were no maggots in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." Let's see here. I'll read 27 through 30. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. And I see we only have 5 more verses here. So I'll close this one out then. The Israelites called it manna. It was like white coriander seed. I have thoughts. And the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, in order that they may see the food which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. Just as the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the covenant for safekeeping." The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a habitable land, a habitable land. That's different. And they ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. And omer is a tenth of an ephah. Well, I don't know what either one of those are, so that didn't help. Thank you, Mr. Author. All right, tell us what we just walked up on, man.
All right, so they're like laying out the whole thing. All right, you're going to be fed every day, but you got to observe the Sabbath, and you're not allowed to do any work, even if it's to prevent starvation. So you got to get extra. Now, you've got people who would say, well, if I can gather extra on Friday so I don't have to pick any up on Saturday, why can't I just pick up a whole bunch on Sunday and be good for the whole week? And so the author's like, well, shit. I've got it. And so he preempts that question by saying, oh, well, someone tried to do that, and then they found a bunch of worms in it. You're going to see the same thing in the New Testament. So Mark comes along, and he's like, all right, so they took Jesus, and they threw him in the tomb, and then on Easter morning, the women go in there, and they don't find him. And then they run off, and they don't tell anyone what they saw, which, okay, how did we get the story then if they didn't tell anybody? But that's beside the point. But then someone at some point is like, well, couldn't the disciples have just stolen the body? And so Matthew's like, well, there were guards posted there because they thought, couldn't someone steal the body? So they put him there to make sure no one could take it. And he miraculously was gone anyway. And so, like, whenever there's an argument against, some little overlooked detail, someone is going to come along later and say, well, I can fix this. And so they just throw in something random. And it's like, well, if you can gather 2 shares on Friday so you don't have to pick any up on Saturday, why would Yahweh really be upset with you picking up 2 shares on Monday? That doesn't make any sense. They're like, well, it's so that you'll trust him. And so, it's stuff like that. And you see some of that in there where they're like, they go out on Saturday to pick up some stuff, and Yahweh gets upset. He's like, man, when are you going to listen to me? Because this whole thing, he's gradually going to get more and more upset with the people until he just starts killing them by the thousands, which is going to come later.
Yeah. That's kind of his thing.
Yeah. And it's all this stuff. It's like, you have to have absolute obedience or he's going to kill you. And if something bad happens, it's probably because you did something wrong. So, I mean, look, these are the people who literally invented the scapegoat. So,
yeah,
but yeah, that's what we're looking at there. And this little thing right here, verse 35, the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a habitable land. This is one of just a few sentences that were inserted between Exodus and Deuteronomy. And if you remove just a handful of little sentences that break up the narration, then, because like if you look at like verse 34, it's talking about, taking an omer of this stuff and gathering it up and keeping it on the altar, but before the Ark of the Covenant. And then right after that, it tells you how much an omer is. But then you have this verse that breaks up that thing. And they did this for 40 years. Well, hang on. Why is the text interrupted here? Every single time you see a mention of them wandering the wilderness for 40 years, it interrupts the text. That's because this is a later insertion. Originally, the whole thing begins and ends with a miraculous river crossing and a celebration of the Passover. And it was 1 year.
Wow.
They celebrate the Passover. They cross the Red Sea. That begins their journey. They arrive at the Jordan River a year later, river crossing, Passover, and they besiege Jericho. Originally, that was the story. It was 1 year in total, but they're trying to make this look more like the exile in Babylon. And
that's
so,
what I was gonna ask.
but the number 40 is like an important number to them. It's like, let's make this 40 years because that's a standard generation. And so they change it by inserting a few lines here and there, and clumsily, I might add, like here, where it breaks up the whole discussion about gathering an omer of this stuff and telling you how much that is. And that's where you get this 40-year wandering from. It's a clumsy insertion to change the timeline.
That is very interesting. Like, wow. And yeah, because you can clearly see here, it's not a natural insertion. It definitely reads awkwardly. So that's highlighting. And that is interesting. But you do see that 40 over and over again, even with not Moses, but Noah. Noah's flood would range for 40 days and 40 nights type of thing. Jesus goes and fasts for 40 days. Then you also have, the Exodus is supposed to have this 400-year silence. And then there's supposed to be this other 400-year silence between Malachi and Matthew. So you definitely see this low-key obsession with the number 40 and 400.
And real quick, go back to chapter 16 and go to verse, I believe it's 28.
28. The Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse my commandments? Oh, that's funny. And instructions.
Yeah.
Where did it go? There it is.
Yeah, he's talking about his commandments that, according to the edited version
and
of
they
Exodus
don't exist
yet. They don't have them yet. Yeah, they keep doing this.
Oh, man.
Yeah, because he's talking about them violating the commandment about obeying the Sabbath, and he hasn't given it to them yet. It's just like Noah preserving 14 of each of the kosher animals. Well, what the hell's a kosher animal? According to the story, they're all vegetarians, and he doesn't have the food laws yet. That's a whole different book. Yeah, it's and this is problems when you go back and you redact a text, multiple times.
Man, I love this. And it looks like the chat is getting quite a bit out of this as well. These are always so cool. Oh, yeah, this was actually one of my favorite stories because this is when Moses gets disqualified for the promised land in a very interesting way. So we're in chapter 17 now, which in this version is kind of prefaced as water from the rock. And so from the wilderness of sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out to Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" Livestock who are already dead, mind you. So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do for this people? They are almost ready to stone me." Well, that escalated quickly. The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and the water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" You want to go on a little bit more, or you have something for these first 7?
So one thing, this is like a repeat of the complaint and the water miracle of chapter 15, only instead of throwing a wooden idol in it, he pokes a rock with a stick. Now later he's going to do this, and Yahweh's going to get pissed that he touched the rock with the stick.
Yes,
and he'll be like, "No, you don't get to go to Israel now, dude. Sorry, you did all this stuff for me, but I told you to yell at the rock, not to hit it, and you hit it. So you're barred from entering Israel. You got to die inside of the promised land. And that's how Deuteronomy is. Spoiler alert, Moses dies. And then he continues writing the book of Deuteronomy. That's right. It's like his zombies up there writing. Or maybe
he literally writes about his own death.
Or maybe like Yahweh was dictating it, and he's like writing it, and he's like, wait,
he's finding out about it in real time.
Oh, shit, it's really bizarre. I want to see him bring that to the big screen. Yeah, I want to see how they do that little scene right there. And then, of course, we have this ideological tale for Massa and Meribah, which literally the words mean test and quarrel.
Wow.
Why these places were actually named that, who knows? But they decided this is, the reason for it is because they tested and quarreled. It's kind of like the town Cut and Shoot, Texas. It was named because there was these two pastors at this church, and there was this rivalry going on, and you got to look it up. It's hilarious. It's called Cut and Shoot, Texas. It's a little town.
I'm definitely looking this
between
up.
Houston and Austin.
Intrigued me.
And the ideological tale. I can't find out how much if this is true, but this new pastor comes to town. He takes over the church, and some of the young people love him. Some of the old people hate him. And there ends up being this whole big rivalry in town over the church. And, they just didn't like some of them didn't like the new pastor. And so they went and chained the doors to the church shut. And people were taught, they were hiding in the bushes. They were going to ambush the people when they tried to go to church. And they were like, yeah, if they try to go into that church, we're going to cut them and shoot them. And eventually the whole thing got settled. It's one of those things, though, I can't find out how much of the story is true. It could be all of it, but maybe it was none of it. Who knows? As far as I could tell, there was no actual, real violence. No one actually got, stabbed or shot. But that's supposedly how this town got its name. And so that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
You've got this thing. They tested and quarreled with Yahweh, and that's what we got. Now, this could be a thing similar to Jacob and, was it the Jabbok River?
Yes.
Where he got in a fist fight with Yahweh and won, or not Yahweh, with El Elyon and won.
Yep.
And then El's like, dude, you got to let me up so I can go pick up the sun and carry it across the sky. And Jacob's like, no, dude, I pinned down a god. I'm good. And so then El punches him in the nuts and he still loses the fight. Which is a story that I believe the Hindus also have. It also pops up in Buddhism. There's a few stories like that. The Israelites didn't make this up. They borrowed it.
Now, just to ask, and I know I'm off screen, so let me come on to ask: is the nut punching aspect across all the lines, or is that uniquely Jewish? Is that
no? The gods always cheat, and quite often they knee him in the groin. No, that's a repeated thing. That keeps happening.
That's hilarious.
Gods fight dirty, dude. And so this may have originally been a thing where someone beat up their god, and then they changed it. Oh well, no, you didn't just you didn't fight with God. You just you disobeyed him slightly by asking for water because you were in the desert and dying of dehydration. It doesn't quite fit. They're not quarreling with God. They're just asking for some water because they're in the desert. So it may be a thing where they originally some hero beat up Yahweh and they wrote over it with this story by just repeating parts of chapter 15. So that could be what we're looking at.
Oh, that is hilarious. Okay, I got to get out the chat because Alyssa has me cracking up. She said this would be a great I can just put it on the screen. This would be a great origin story for why circumcision was required. Speaking to the nut punching, you know what I'm saying? Oh man, that's hilarious. All right. So, we're getting into Amalek, so this is going to get good. So just out of nowhere after this, then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, Joshua's here. Choose some men for us and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow, I used to love this part. I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur, I remember her, went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on either side. So his hands were steady until the sun set, and Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the sword. Okay, I want to talk about this part. Do you have anything for these few verses? Oh, no, okay, there's just 2 more verses, 3 more, so I'll read those real quick. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a remembrance in a book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called it, the Lord is my banner. He said, a hand upon the banner of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. All right, before I let you go, I had this, though this was actually popular for me. I preached this quite a bit. I've preached it under different titles. I think one time I named it Use Both Hands, and it was just the idea that you had to have spiritual help, have somebody doing the spiritual work with Moses' hands being lifted up, and then you had to have somebody doing the physical work. So I've actually always loved the imagery of this story. So I am excited to hear, like, what is the backdrop of this? What's really going on here? What do we not see?
Okay. Real quick, I just remembered that the mention of Massa and Meribah, they are, when this whole tale is summarized in Numbers 33, though that location isn't mentioned, it's not in there. So that means it was added to Exodus after Numbers 33 was written to summarize this section of Exodus. And it comes from Deuteronomy 9. Only Deuteronomy 9 has them going through there at a different point in their journey. So they took it from Deuteronomy 9 and they stuck it into this thing in Exodus, but it violates the timeline that you have laid out in Deuteronomy 9.
Wow.
So there's that weird little thing. But no, so this whole thing. So part of this, it looks like they're taking a story, a military story for Joshua, because Joshua's really not a character in Exodus except for like right here. You've got this whole thing with Joshua in the book of Joshua, but all of a sudden they've got this story about Joshua and this whole military thing, which that's what the book of Joshua is about. It's just all his military victories. But then they're using it as a Moses story. And so there's this Moses-Joshua sort of mix-up going on here. So it's the story of Joshua, but it's also somehow a Moses story. And they've placed it here in Exodus. And there's this whole weird convoluted reason for that. But the whole thing is he's supposed to be using this magical staff of Aaron. This is the Nehushtan staff with the bronze serpent wrapped around it. It's going to pop up again in Numbers 21, I think, where they pray to Nehushtan to defeat the curse of Yahweh. And the whole thing, if you hold this thing up, then it grants you divine power and you're victorious in battle. This actually comes from a story of Dionysus, where essentially the same thing is happening. And so he's using like the power of this magical staff to get victory in battle. There's a lot of Dionysus in the story of Moses. But the reason why Joshua is popping up here is likely because I think Joshua and Moses were originally the same character.
Yes.
It was a character probably named Joshua, and he goes through and he does all these different things, okay? And then he comes they kind of retooled the character to make him appeal to the Jews living in Egypt. And so he gets an Egyptian name. He's born in Egypt. He goes and he does all these different things in and around Egypt. And that's why they both begin their journey with a water crossing and a Passover feast.
Wow.
And because how does the book of Joshua begin? They celebrate the Passover,
yes,
and cross the Jordan River. And if you actually go through and you look at, let me see, bear with me just one moment. I want to pull something up for you real quick, because a lot of people, if you just look at, if you just look at Moses and Joshua, you're probably not going to think that they're, that similar.
Yeah.
But let's see. They are both called by Yahweh to lead Israel. They are both called Yahweh's servant. They both send spies to scout the promised land. The spies, they both have two spies that return with favorable news. They both parted a major body of water. They led people across on dry land. Moses was given manna but promised fruit, while Joshua no longer receives manna and was given fruit. They both witnessed Yahweh appear in person. Both were said to have enjoyed the presence of Yahweh, those words specifically.
Yep.
Both were ordered to remove sandals when they met with Yahweh in person. Both were interpreters of the will of Yahweh. Both founded a teaching that was carved into stone. Both are made great in the eyes of Israel by Yahweh. Again, those specific words. They both faced people with hardened hearts. They both gave a final speech to Israel immediately before their deaths. They made treaties with their enemies, whom they were instructed to kill. These are very specific things here, okay? They both led Israel in vast military campaigns. They both celebrate the Passover immediately prior to leading an army. Both were uncircumcised when their journeys began, which they're supposed to be circumcised when they're 8 days old.
Oh,
okay?
Right, yeah.
So, these are, again, some really weird things. Both have to be reminded that they're standing on holy ground. Both use the powers of Yahweh to defeat an enemy. Both exercise power over the sun. Both extend magic weapons over their heads to defeat an army. Moses here with the Amalekites, and Joshua he extends a sword to defeat Ai. Both intercede with Yahweh after Israel fails to obey him. Both have their God-given missions interrupted by circumcision. Both were born in Egypt. Both were accompanied by a plague that killed their enemies. Both led an army of men and women. And that's another thing. You typically don't have mixed-gendered armies. But both of these people are leading an army made up of men and women. Like I said, these are very specific and odd details. Yeah. Both carve teachings on a stone while up on a mountain. Both remind the people to keep ancient festivals. Both remind the people to keep practicing ancient sacrifices. Both remind the people to keep a new covenant. And both are referred to as a savior.
Wow,
that's a lot of things to have in common with a character.
But it makes sense, because you mentioned earlier about how the original end of this story, it's only like a year's time between them leaving Egypt and arriving where they need to. But then once you decide, oh no, we're going to need to stretch this out for another 40 years, you now need two different characters to kind of handle this thing out, because we're no longer in that place where we're letting people live to 300 years anymore. Yeah. And so now it's just like, oh, we need two people to stretch this out. But even more, what I hadn't thought about is that both Moses and Joshua have an undeniable connection to the Christ character. And often the Christ character is connected to Moses directly, but then also to Joshua nearly indirectly in the fact that they share a name, like a naming situation. That's the best word. I
just realized that they also both have theophoric names.
Wow.
I just realized that. Yeah.
See, I love it.
So yeah, that's a lot of parallels. Like there are actually characters that you find in mythology where one is actually based on the other. Okay, where authors actually took one character and they rewrote the story to make a new character, and those two characters have fewer parallels than Moses and Joshua do.
Wow.
So yeah, this is a lot.
Man.
So yeah, I think it was originally one character, and then the tales got split for two different audiences. Those who were like already in the land, and those who are residents of Egypt.
Wow. I love it. Well, it looks like we have time to actually go through another chapter. How do you feel about it?
Let's get this going.
Let's do it. I think we might hit a record tonight. Let me see here. There we are. All right, so we're in chapter 18. Jethro.
Real quick. Yes. I just remember one more thing. They defeat Amalek, and then Yahweh's like, all right, I want you to blot out his name from all of history so no one will ever remember this man again, and make sure that you write down all of these details in the world's most widely distributed book.
Oh.
I just think that there's a case against omniscience here.
Right, absolutely.
Forget his name and publish the hell out of it. I don't know. Yeah. I just
didn't think that one through.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I love it. All right, so we're getting into this with Jethro, and Jethro is actually one of my favorite characters in Moses' story, as far as when I was a pastor. But so Jethro, who's the priest of Midian, he's Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro took her back along with her two sons. Very interesting wording there. The name of the one was Gershom, for he had said, I had been an alien in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for he had said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, along with Moses' sons and wife, came into the wilderness where Moses was encamped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had found them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the Egyptians. Now, before we move on to the next, I got to ask you about this, because I don't think just reading this, verse 2 is throwing me a little bit. So the reading of the word is Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law. Jethro took her back. See, that sounds a lot like divorce to me. What is going on here?
So what is happening here is the chapter originally began with verse 5. Okay. They show up, and Jethro and Moses's wife and kids, they show up and they meet him in the wilderness. But there's a problem. They inserted that part in chapter 4 where Moses takes his wife to Egypt. And now these editors realize that by adding this biographical material to the beginning of the book, they now have a contradiction.
Yeah.
And so basically, like, verse 5 almost sort of gets repeated as like the very beginning, like verse 1, where, you know, it's like, oh yeah, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And then they're like, oh, hang on, we got to backtrack and say, okay, so Jethro, his father-in-law, he took the wife back after Moses sent her away for a while because we forgot that she was just in Egypt. And so they're trying to correct a mistake, and again, they did it clumsily. There's a good chance that while they were copying this, they realized it, and like verses 1 through 4 could have very well just been written in the margin with an arrow pointing to the thing. That's why if you read like verse 1 and then verse 5, it looks like the chapter is starting twice, because it is. The first 4 verses are inserted to fix the problem created by inserting chapter 4. That's what you're seeing here. So originally, Zipporah never went to Egypt. She stayed with Jethro. He went over there. He hooked up. He had some kids. He bounced.
Yep.
And, you know, because he's supposed to have basically come from this area and wasn't this dude who was born on the Nile and the whole basket and everything else. That all came later.
Yeah.
He was hanging out with Jethro. There's the burning bush. He leaves. Everything that comes before that was added much later. And that's why we're still seeing contradictions here. We're seeing ripples of that. Because they screwed it up by adding those earlier chapters in which he goes and he kills an Egyptian. He goes on the run. He meets this chick and has some kids and stuff. And then there's this whole burning bush and says, all right, now you got to go to Egypt.
So this is the whole bunch of retconning.
Yeah. It's that's why this chapter starts twice, because when they started writing, they're like, oh, crap. I added a chapter earlier, but there was some good stuff in there. And there's like Yahweh chasing him around, and there's the impromptu circumcision. We got to keep all this stuff. So, yeah.
Oh, man. All right. Well, moving right along. And this chapter actually isn't very long, so we may be able to get to another one.
Yeah.
But Jethro
That'd be a new record for us.
It would be. Like, it'll be dope. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because he delivered the people from the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. The next day, Moses sat as judge for the people, while the people stood around him from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of God. Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. Teach them the statutes and instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. You should also look for able men among all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate dishonest gain. Set them as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case themselves. so it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their homes in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he said. Moses chose able men from all Israel and appointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but any minor case they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went off to his own country. Okay, I think there's some good stuff here. What do you think?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is sort of the establishment of the idea that the high priest is an advisor to the king. Because remember, Moses is in this new little arrangement we have, as they've modified Exodus and everything else. He's less of a prophet and more of like a political figure. And Aaron or Aaron is now the main prophet type figure. And so Moses is sort of like a stand-in for the king. And of course, the king needs a high priest. And the high priest here is Jethro. Remember this, Yahwism comes from this whole Midian area. And so you've got the Midianite, Yahwism high priest advising the king, and he's basically telling him you need to appoint judges so that they can administer Yahweh's law code. The law code, which still hasn't been given yet, but they're referencing what was removed from chapter 15. So Moses here is trying to administer the law to over like 2.5 million people, a law code that he got a couple chapters back. He's trying to do all this, and it's just too much. I mean, to be honest, I don't care how good you are. Settling the petty disputes of, almost triple the population of Charlotte is probably not really feasible. So now it's like, all right, every so many people, you have a judge over them. Okay, and so what they're actually talking about here is it's almost like an ideological tale of the political system that they have in the post-exilic period. And so they're just kind of referencing that. It's like, oh yeah, this is where our whole system came from. It came from a high priest of Yahweh in Midian, and this great savior who brought us out of this foreign land. And that's what we're seeing here. Is this this whole little thing, and the way he sits down in a place to listen to people who come and they bring their little petty disputes. You're going to see a lot more of this in the book of Judges, especially with like Deborah. The way this worked is, so you would have this judge who they're going to sit somewhere. You go, you bring them, your little dispute. And if it's not a clear-cut thing, you got to put a little thought into it. What they would do is they would sit sometimes near a stream or underneath a tree or something like that, okay? And they would basically just go into sort of like a trance, and they would listen to the white noise of the stream or the wind going through the leaves, and they would kind of zone out. And that's how they would hear the words of God who would help them to figure out what to do. There were probably opioids involved. There usually were. That's why you see things of, like, was it Ezekiel, I think, fasting for days and then eating a bunch of flowers. These were poppies, okay? So it's stuff like that, and so that's what these judges basically did. And this is a common practice. You would get into a place, where you could help with sensory deprivation. And so things like white noise, smoke inhalation, oxygen deprivation, ingesting a variety of different psychotropic ingredients, and this would help you commune with your deity. And that's how you would render these judgments. So whenever it talks about Moses goes and he like sits down somewhere. It's probably sitting by a stream while munching on some poppies or something. Got those lemon poppy seed muffins that the coffee shop sells. Yeah, those are great. And so
he sounds like a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. They all do it like a
yeah. And yeah, he was just chowing down on them and got him some cannabis smoke wafting up, listening
I heard that's
to the
how
terebinth
Google got
trees.
started.
Probably. Yeah, so that was the role of these judges, and he's trying to do all of it himself, probably because of the poppies. But now he's got to outsource some of this, and so now like every 1,000 people has their own judge.
I love this because this is very key. I think Jethro and Zipporah are often overlooked characters in the role that they play, very much like Melchizedek. I often remind people that Abraham is not actually a founder of a faith system. He's initiated into a faith system by this mysterious character known as Melchizedek, who was already some type of participant with this covenant system. But then you also see this similar type of thing happening with Zipporah, because she ends up being the one that introduces circumcision to Moses, or at least introduces it to their children. And then the same way, you have Jethro, who comes to Moses while Moses is talking to God, mind you. Moses is having communication with God, but it has to be Jethro who tells Moses how to be a good leader, which was very interesting. This used to be actually one of my favorite chapters. The first book that I was ever going to publish, I didn't publish it, but it was based on this conversation. It was going to be called The Ables of Leadership. And there are many organizations, like corporations, that use this chapter as inspiration for why we do leadership the way that we do, why we kind of break things down into compartmentalization. But this definitely made me a fan of Jethro, just looking at him being able to come along and say, okay, now Moses, what you're doing is stupid, bro. You can't talk to all 10 million, 2 million of these people. You're going to have to break these down into numbers. But at the same time, what I do want to highlight from a sociological perspective, it does show, because this starts with God is speaking directly to Moses. But then Jethro says, hey, Moses, instead of you doing this by yourself, let's just get these other priests in and just let them handle the minor cases, which is ultimately is moving us further and further from the necessity of the voice of God, but also highlighting this idea that the voice of God is actually a sociological phenomenon. At the end of the day, what they're trying to hear is the spirit that represents the best interest of their people group, of their national identity, which is the same thing politicians do today. But it's very interesting. So I love it. I love it. Oh, man. Oh, yeah. Somebody put, and this is actually, I do remember coming across this, so I'm going to show this. Jethro's name was Ruel, before the writers forgot. I do remember coming across that before, and I cannot remember the thoughts that I had, but I want to. All right. So I do think we have enough time for another
let's
chapter.
Go.
Because we're only an hour and 13 minutes and go an hour and 30 minutes, and this doesn't seem like a long chapter, so I don't see why not. What do you think?
Yeah, let's get into it. Yeah, because we've been doing like 1.5 to 2 hour episodes, so I'm good.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Oh, and Norbert dropped another super chat.
And we did have a super chat, so I do want to acknowledge that. He's always
here with them.
Look at there. Man, he's amazing. Thanks as always, gentlemen. Good to give with expecting tenfold, but actually appreciating the content. I appreciate that, man. That's so true. So good to give without having to expect anything. Just giving out of appreciation, That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you are indeed appreciated. I should probably put the scriptures back on the screen. And for those of you that are coming in late, this is Bible Study with an Ex-Pastor featuring Dragons and Genesis, where we learn about the Bible and laugh at the bullshit. Welcome in. All right, so we're in chapter 19 of Exodus. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim, entered the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. Israel came there in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and now I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites. So Moses went, summoned the elders of the people, and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. The people all answered as one, everything that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, in order that people may hear when I speak with you, and so trust you ever after. Very interesting.
So, couple things here. So, this little thing in, I believe, where is it? Verse 4, it says, he brought him here on eagle's wings. Now, that doesn't mean like it's a thing from like The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings where some giant eagles came and flew him over there. Okay, Gandalf wasn't involved. It'd be cool if he was, but he's not in this one. But it's basically saying, he brought them here speedily. Okay, he rushed them. He got them out of the Sea of Reeds and got them straight over to Mount Horeb.
Wow.
But so the whole thing, it's a very speedy, a very rapid pace from A to B. But there's a problem here. They've inserted all these different little stops along the way and delays and time for people to get hungry and to get thirsty, and then they get solved, and then the problems arise again and all the rest. All of this is to try to make Passover to the arrival at Sinai coincide with the calendar that they have set up after the Babylonian exile. And so you have the Passover celebration, and then you have the Feast of Weeks, which is it's 49 days after Passover. That's why it's called a Feast of Weeks. It's 7 times 7, so basically a week of weeks. It's at the Feast of Weeks that it's to celebrate the revelation of the law code. And so they've got this thing 49 days later, but in the original story, they go from like the Sea of Reeds to Mount Horeb super fast. That's why I said, I got you here on, and like Deuteronomy 32 confirms this. They got there like straight away, just zoop, straight there. But now you've got this contradiction because they want it to match up with this whole thing. So they've inserted these things to make it last a month and a half, but they forgot to remove that line that says that he practically flew him over there. And so you've got that.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a little bit of an issue that is frequently overlooked.
Man, and what's funny about that is that Eagle's Wings was a popular Christian worship song in the late 80s, late 90s, early 2000s. It was actually one of my favorites, and I don't think I ever actually correlated it with the Exodus story, even though that's actually where that song came from.
Yeah, and of course
that
Yahweh
was actually really good insight.
Yeah. And of course, Yahweh appearing in a cloud of smoke, that's a reference to the Holy of Holies, where they would fill it with a mixture of incense and cannabis smoke in order to allow the high priest to commune with his deity. You just get him really doped up, and all sorts of strange stuff can happen. And so the presence of Yahweh is, of course, associated with a dense cloud of smoke. That's why in this story, every time he shows up, there's smoke everywhere.
That's
or a
right.
cloud,
That's
or both.
This is why God is known as the Most High.
Exactly.
Oh my! Oh, someone else said the high priest. Yes, that works. That works.
Yeah, he very much was. The amount of residue they found at the temple of Yahweh in Tel Arad was tremendous. They were
man.
burning a forest of cannabis in that thing.
Yikes.
Or as I like to call it, they were hotboxing the Holy of Holies.
Hotboxing the Holy of Holies.
Yeah,
if Christianity would have been sold to me this way, I'd likely still be a believer.
Right.
Oh, I love it. All right, so we'll pick up with the B clause of verse 9. When Moses had told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and prepare for the third day, because on the third day," something about the third day, "the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in sight of all the people. You shall set."
Put the screen back up? The Bible?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's likely. So y'all are just hearing me do my James L. Jones and y'all aren't seeing nothing. There we go. There we go. "You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, be careful not to go up to the mountain or to touch the edge of it. Any who touch the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch them, but they shall be stoned or shot with arrows." I saw this in a movie. "Whether animal or human being, they shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain." So Moses went down from the mountain to the people. He consecrated the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Prepare for the third day. Do not go near a woman." Oh, okay. "On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of trumpets so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now all of Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak, and God would answer them in thunder. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. How did he get up to the top of the mountain that fast? Okay, that's just me. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through to see the Lord. Otherwise, many of them will perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Break yourself, fool. Moses said to the Lord, "The people are not permitted to come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, 'Set limits around the mountain and keep it holy.' The Lord said to him, 'Go down, then come back up and bring Aaron with you. But do not let either the priest or the people break through to come up to the Lord. Otherwise, he will break out against them.' So Moses went down to the people and told them." I need some understanding here, because this feels a little goofy.
Quick. Right. Okay, real quick. Scroll up a little bit to verse 12. Yeah. All right. I want you to highlight all of verse 12 and the first half of verse 13 up to the part where it says, "They shall not live."
Yoink.
Okay. So.
Get out of the way.
So. All of that is a later addition. This is part of the priestly code. This concerns, basically the behavior. Actually, a lot of this concerns like the behavior of the priests and stuff. This is part of like the whole like priestly law code. There's a thing you can learn about it. It's called the documentary hypothesis, and it's about how the Torah was assembled. You have four sources, according to this hypothesis: J, E, D, and P. J, because it's German, that's Yahweh. E is the Elohist source. There's the one where God is called El Elyon. D, the Deuteronomist. He's responsible for all of Deuteronomy and a handful of things scattered throughout the other books. And then P, the priestly source. Now, for the most part, this hypothesis has kind of fallen out of favor. And what we have now is sort of a modified version of it. It's essentially broken down into two groups. You have the priestly material, which is still called P. And then you have what they call NP, or non-priestly. And this is basically everything else. And then scholars, like that, there's pretty much consensus on that. You have the priestly source and then the non-priestly material. And the only thing they really argue about now is how much can you subdivide NP, the non-priestly material. How much can you break that down, and what are those sources and when they were put in?
Wow.
Now, this little thing right here, 1912 to 13a, that is a priestly insertion. This was added into the text, and the whole thing just concerns like ritual instructions for the temple priests. And so that's why it kind of interrupts the text and looks a bit wonky. So it talks about, because on the third day the Lord will come down to Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain. You can see that 12 to 13a interrupts the flow of the text. And so that's this other source that's, kind of shoehorning in there. And then it talks about anyone who touches this holy mountain, you're going to be put to death. This is restrictions concerning entering the Holy of Holies, because this is what it's supposed to represent. Okay, that's why it's all covered in smoke. And it has the presence of Yahweh. Okay, only certain people were allowed in the most sacred places.
That's right.
And, these were restrictions that were put in place mainly so that one group of priests could seize control and oust other groups.
Yes.
So you've got this thing of priests who are like, this is ours. And if you other temple servants try to come in, we'll just execute you, okay?
Yep.
Sure, you used to be able to come in, but we've got the power now. So because this is what's happening in the Bible is different groups of priests are taking over.
Yeah.
And each time they do, they decide that they're the right ones, and the ones that came before them are a bunch of filthy heathens.
Yep.
So read the book of Leviticus, and it's all about how awesome the Levites are. Then read the book of Numbers, and it's all about how the Levites are a bunch of worthless scumbags.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It's completely different. Read the books of Samuel and Kings.
Yeah.
And you get one story. Then read Chronicles, which is written by a Levitical priest.
Wow.
And it's like, oh yeah, those dudes were like scumbags, and us, the Levitical priests, had to come in and fix everything. Like these dudes just come out of nowhere. They stormed the temple, the palace, they kill people. They're like these hardcore heroes in there. But when you read the source material, Samuel and Kings, you're like, man, none of this stuff is in there. Where'd this come from?
Right.
The Levites just made it up. So that's what we're seeing here. There's this little addition concerning these ritual instructions and why only certain people are allowed to go different places. And if other people try, they'll just be slaughtered on sight. And this is why later, when they're transporting the Ark of the Covenant, they're bringing it over to Jerusalem, it falls off a donkey. And this dude is like, I don't want Yahweh to break. So he reaches up. And what was his name? Uzziah or something?
Yep.
Yeah. He reaches up. He touches the thing, and lightning just comes out and just smokes the dude on the spot. Now, obviously this never happened, okay? Regardless of what the dude with the crazy hair has on Ancient Aliens, how they accidentally made this generator or something and it shot lightning.
Holy
snap. No, this didn't happen, okay? This is the temple priest saying, no, you're not allowed to touch it, not even if it's falling. Okay, that's what this is about. It's like later when they find the man picking up sticks in the wilderness on Saturday. They're like, well, what do we do? And Yahweh's like, well, look, I said no one can work. So even if they're just picking up firewood, you got to kill them. It's an argument to say, look, you're not allowed to do anything, okay? Not even pick up a stick. Okay, this isn't something that ever happened. It's just a tale to stress the importance of what they're saying. Wow. And then the rest of this is it's basically the great theophany. It's the magical appearance of a deity associated with volcanoes and thunder. He's literally communicating through through thunder. This is an ancient practice called brontomancy. It pops up numerous times in the Bible. Like this prophet just like sits there and thunder occurs and they can hear the voice of God. This is like taking the guts of an animal and throwing them out and being like,
Yes.
oh yeah, don't buy a lottery ticket this Saturday. You'll lose. But next, that's what this is. This is deciphering the will of the gods through something, whether it's the entrails of a pig or thunder or listening to the white noise of a terebinth tree.
Yes.
That's what we're seeing here. And so you've got this mountain that's shaking. This is an earthquake. This is an eruption. You've got smoke. You've got fire. Okay. This is a volcano god.
Yeah.
Because that's originally what Yahweh was. That's why he's associated with metallurgy. Okay.
Yep.
And then he's also been merged with Baal. So he's a storm god. His right hand is raised so he can hurl down the lightning bolt like Zeus. He's actually called Rider on the Clouds. This is a title from the god Baal Hadad, Rider on the Clouds. He literally borrowed this exact title from the Baal cycle from the Ugaritic text.
No, and that's another popular Christian song by Judy Jacobs. That lyrics is in there. Behold, he comes riding on a cloud.
Yeah.
Man,
yeah.
wow.
That's the god Baal. Yeah. That's why Yahweh's associated with lightning and thunder.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
They're literally talking about Baal when they say that. Yeah, and the whole thing where he lives up on Mount Zaphon / Zion, that's the holy mountain of Baal.
Wow.
So yeah, and then the other thing is this whole thing where they go over to Mount Hermon, and this is where Yahweh comes down. Mount Hermon, according to Hebrew mythology, is think of it sort of like the main ziggurat in Babylon. It's this gateway to heaven, okay, where the mortal realm and the divine, they sort of touch right there, okay? Yeah. And that's why you had to destroy the Tower of Babel, because then people could cross, and you don't want to be able to just have people, transgressing the natural order, going from one realm to another, okay? Yeah. You got to separate it, So this is what Mount Hermon represents in Hebrew mythology. It's this holy thing where the pinnacle of it is basically like right on the border of heaven. In the book of Enoch, this is where the Watchers, the rebellious angels led by, not the one in Azazel, that's a different one, Simhaza.
Ooh.
He recruits a whole bunch of angels to his side, and they come down to earth and they touch down on Mount Hermon, because this is the place it's like closest to heaven. It basically just one little step away, okay? It's like the doorway between the firmament and the earth. And so if you're going to have a god come down from heaven and land on earth, Mount Hermon's a great place to do it. That's when the border between the two is kind of thin. So so that's why he's doing that right here. And like deities, they typically show up on mountaintops, like Zeus on Olympus. And so that's what you have here. That's why people built things like, ziggurats and pyramids. It was to create a holy mountain within a city. That's why they all had they were either meant to represent a god or have temples on top of them, or it was the resting place of someone who meant to represent a god, like a pharaoh. It was, they weren't building these weird, landing sites for alien craft.
Right.
They were building a mountain. Okay. That's the purpose of them. That's why they kept making them bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wow.
It was to make their own mountains so that the gods, they could meet the gods there. And this is like a universal thing, whether you're in Babylon or Midian or Jerusalem or down in Belize at the Mayan temples, you build a giant pyramidal structure to resemble a mountain. You put a temple on top. That's where you go to offer your sacrifices.
Wow. Man, this is good stuff. All right. Well, look, let me pull this back up. Let me get back on the right tab because I started looking up some Haza because I was interested. All right. So we are in chapter 20 now. And this should be a chapter that's very familiar to everybody. And yes, Norbert, I do have the Four Locos on deck, man. That is my ratchet drink. So this is a very famous chapter. So let's kind of jump into this. It's prefaced as the Ten Commandments. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heavens above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Interesting. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children of the iniquity of parents, or for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Number one, that math doesn't work out right, but I'll talk about that later. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, oh, God is okay with that, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land and the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witnesses against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's horse. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. House, not horse. House, wife, male or female slave, ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When all the people witnessed thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, there's that smoking again, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come only to test you and to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin. Then the people stood at a distance while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And we only have a few more verses here, so I'll finish.
Go ahead and get those out of the way.
The Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, you have seen for yourselves how I spoke with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver alongside me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. You need make for me only an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your offerings of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. But if you make for me an altar of stone, do not build it of hewn stones, for if you use a chisel upon it, you profane it. You shall not go up by the steps to my altar, so that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. What the hell is this, Jason? What's going on here? Why is we getting naked at the end?
Well, so real quick, we're going to cover the last part of this first. So Yahweh, different deities had different types of altars. And some deities you would use like clay bricks. Some of them you would make it out of wood. For Yahweh, you were supposed to use raw stone. You don't shape it. You just pile up raw stone. It's very, very primitive. Remember, in the oldest days, he was this sort of wilderness god, which is why the Hebrews have to leave the cities and go out into the wilderness in order to worship him. And later we're going to find another example where they make an altar for him, and it's made of 12 raw stones, one from each tribe of Israel, and they're just, piled up. Okay. And so Yahweh, he wants a very specific type of altar. He just wants a pile of rocks. And then you're going to put some poor creature on there and you're going to slaughter it and set it on fire, as you do for a bloodthirsty war god. And then when they're talking about like climbing up this thing, you got to remember these dudes, like they wore like skirts and stuff. So you don't want to do that. Like, do this on level ground. Otherwise, you may catch a glimpse of like the dude in front of you, or when you're walking, just like turn your head,
Oh, that's hilarious.
Just, get a ball cap and pull it down low, all right. You don't want to accidentally like see some, shepherd's junk when you're going to make your sacrifice, and, come on, man, have some modesty, dude. Really. So yeah. But now we need to go back to the beginning of this chapter. So it starts off when he starts off with the 10 Commandments. Okay. Like, look at what he says. He doesn't just say like, I'm the creator of the universe or something. No, he's like, look, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. Okay. So he's establishing who he is and why they owe him before going into the beginning of his law code, and the first rule. This is a suzerainty law code.
Wow.
You can Google that, Suzerainty, a suzerainty law code. And the Hebrews, they were very experienced with this, because what this is, a parent state is outlining the responsibilities of a tributary nation. And see, the Israelites, like, they were conquered by all of their neighbors and half of the people who neighbored those neighbors, okay? So the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Greeks, everybody and his brother took over Israel at one point or another, okay?
Yeah.
Like 80% of their history, they were governed by other nations. They're quite familiar with these things, okay? And they're just trying to write out their own. But in this one, they don't want to be subject to some other nation. They're going to be subject to a deity. Okay, cool. Because the idea of actually being like self-governing is just so far-fetched from someone who was always being conquered. Yeah. So they got to be conquered by someone. It might as well be their own god. Okay, cool, done. And then maybe he'll protect them from everyone else. At least that's the hope, and it doesn't really pan out. And the way these things start off is they begin by identifying the two different parties involved in this contract, the parent nation and the subservient nation, okay? And wow. It basically says like what the greater nation has done in order to justify the subservience of the lesser party. Okay, and it then outlines like stipulations that have to be upheld by the vassal state. And when you look at the thing, that's exactly what you're seeing here. It reads very much like these suzerainty law codes. Yes. Specifically like the ones from the Hittites. It very closely resembles theirs. And one of the things that it actually requires is that you have an annual public meeting to read out this contract to the general public, to remind everyone that you're a vassal state. And Yahweh literally commands this. You're going to read out my commandments to the whole of the people every year, on the Festival of Weeks. And again, it follows the pattern of a suzerainty law code. Yeah. And so it starts off, by Yahweh is the parent state, and the nation of Israel is the vassal state, okay?
Yes.
And it says what he did to deserve that. He brought him out of Egypt, out of this land of slavery, okay? And he's like, look, I'm really jealous, okay? You can't do these things. It's going to upset me, okay? And then I'll have to punish you. This is very characteristic of these things. If you step out of line, the more powerful nation that has, armies garrisoned in your country that are loyal to them, not to you, they're going to bring the hammer down, okay? They may just go into your city and take one person out of every 20 or 30 or every 10 and execute them in public. This was the practice of decimation. You take one person out of 10 and kill them as an example to everyone else. That's how you punish disobedience. And so you would do stuff like that, okay? And so that's what we're seeing here. Now, we get into something, this is the first glimpses of it that we're going to see, but it's going to go even deeper in the coming chapters. So we're going to have a lot of fun in the next couple of episodes. So,
wow.
Yahweh starts talking about, so let's see, starting in like verse 4, he starts talking about, you shall not make for yourself an idol.
Yes.
Now, the specific words used here is exactly the words used in the Genesis 1 creation story when he talks about building stuff. It actually says that he, I'm trying to remember the exact, like the best translation of the word. I can't think of it right off the top of my head. But the whole thing is the word used for like crafting an idol and the word that he uses for like crafting the world and like crafting people, it's the same terminology that's being used. And it isn't used every time someone makes something. Okay, these are very specific words. It's sort of like a graven image sort of situation. And so what he's doing here, this is a nod to the Genesis 1 creation account. And he starts off by talking about like creating all of these things. And I watch, bring up the verses again, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so he starts off, you will not craft anything, anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or the water under the earth. This is the order of creation. He creates the sky. He creates the land. He's going down the list, okay, just like in Genesis 1. And let me see, because there's actually more of it further down, I think. Let's see. Okay, right here. Scroll back up a little bit so we can see like verses 10 and 11.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, here we go. And then so he goes through and he's referencing the creation, right? And if you ever really look closely at the creation, it's like they do the sky and they do the earth and the water and they do then the next days, 4, 5, and 6, they sort of repeat that by making things in them. That's why the sun and the moon and the stars are created on the 4th day after he created the lights in the sky on the first day. Okay, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's the same thing. It's things happening in the same places. Okay.
Yeah.
And then now we see, once he's done with this sort of creation, he then talks about the Sabbath day that then pops up on day 7. So we're getting a nod to the creation story in the first verses. And then here in verse 8, he now creates the Sabbath day. So he just went through the order of creation. Then he goes into the Sabbath day creation. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Now he's done that. And the heavenly stuff is now complete. You keep the Sabbath.
Wow.
Now you're done. And now you move on to earthly affairs. Okay, now we're done with the divine, and we can move on to talking about matters of civil order. We can talk about, honoring your parents and committing murder and stuff like that. So we've handled the divine. Now we can handle the mundane. And so that's what we're seeing here. That's why they're laid out in that order. And it ends with keeping the Sabbath day.
Wow. Just even interestingly enough, I'm looking at it now, and this is speculation for sure. I don't want anybody to think that this is deep study here. But just hearing you mention that and looking at the way things are laid out after they hit these kind of heavenly things, honoring your father and mother, it almost seems like this kind of takes us back through the entire Genesis narrative. And so this is kind of these verse 12 is a hint at Cain and Abel. Verse 13 is a hint at Cain and Abel. And then it seems like adultery is the next thing to show up in scripture. Stealing is the next thing to show up, and then bearing false witness, even down to coveting your neighbors or your neighbor's wife or so on. We kind of see those things play out over and over again with Abimelech and Jacob or Abraham, and the many times that they go down to Egypt and someone covets their sister wife. And so now that's something that I'm going to be tracing for a while, because that's interesting. Man. Okay. All right. Is there anything else in chapter 20?
Let me think. Now, one thing, so it talks about honoring your parents. It talks about, don't commit murder, don't commit adultery, things like that. But there's something that is conspicuously absent from this list.
Oh, give me the tea.
It doesn't say anything about obeying your king. It doesn't say anything about loyalty to the royal house. It doesn't say anything about temple worship. That's a problem. This list likely originated, like this version of the Ten Commandments likely originated during the exilic period while they were in Babylon.
I can see that. They
don't have a king, and their temple is a pile of rubble in another country. That's why they don't have this. They should. Like, you should have stuff about, the leader of the entire country, about your high priest, about your temple, which is like central to your culture. And that is completely absent from this.
Wow.
Their God, they're talking about all the stuff up in the heavens, and they're completely lacking anything about their deity being present in a temple. That is very, very odd. Wow. This is probably written during the exilic period, and then they copied it over into Exodus, which was written much later. And so that's an issue right there. And then, of course, we move on, like after this is all done, Moses is this sort of mediator figure who is assigned to basically commune with Yahweh. So Yahweh talks to Moses, Moses talks to the people. This used to be the role of the king. This is another thing that Moses has in common with ancient kings. The king was, the representative of a deity on earth. You didn't talk to a god directly. You talked to the king, and then the king did everything, with your deity. Now, of course, you also had people who had little house gods and stuff like that they worshipped. But your big national deity, you didn't commune with them. You brought your matters before the king or before your local representative. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have that. But then one thing that you see is, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is, but the thing, it goes like Yahweh is speaking and it switches to a person speaking, and then it switches back to Yahweh.
Yes.
I try to remember exactly where it happens, but it's like you can tell they're copying things from different sources. You have something where Yahweh's talking to people, and this is, tossed into a section, tossed alongside a section where it's a person talking. And so like, who's narrating this? And it's inconsistent. It goes back and forth. This is because it comes from multiple sources. You have different things being cobbled together here.
Which I know that's also very common in the book of Deuteronomy as well. You'll see a lot of that where at one moment it's God speaking and then it switches over to the elders speaking or Moses speaking. And it's funny because when I read the Bible before, I didn't always gravitate towards recognizing that. But it's like the more serious I got about trying to understand, it was just like, wait a minute, something is odd here. Something is odd here. So as we're just kind of wrapping up for the night with chapter 20, we worked through 20 chapters of Exodus. We've also realized that this book should have ended after chapter 15. What are we really in store for? Why did they need to give us 16 to what? Is it over? It's over 30 chapters in Exodus,
right? 40. It's 40, got 40 chapters, one for each year that they're on this little migration.
Wow.
Got a good little number there. Well, so you have this thing. What we're about to be seeing is essentially the Jewish version of the law code of Hammurabi, which you can, we will never find the Ark of the Covenant. Indiana Jones located it once, and then it melted the faces of a bunch of Nazis. But after that, we lost it. We don't know where it is. Steven Spielberg probably knows, but we can't find it anymore.
Oh, that would be awesome.
But the law code of Hammurabi, we've still got that. And of course, it's in a British museum because, if it belongs to any culture, then it belongs to the British Museum.
Yes.
That's where the pyramids would be if they weren't so damn big.
That's right.
But the law code of Hammurabi, don't remember how I was talking about how the one little offset candle on the menorah that they use for Hanukkah, you light that one and you use it to go and you use it to light all the other candles, and it's to represent the spreading of the light of the Lord throughout the world. And this candle is called the Shamash candle, who is the sun god who would spread his light over the world. And this was one of the deities that got rolled into Yahweh. And that's sort of how Yahweh became a sun god. Well, here, Yahweh, he takes this piece of stone and he carves his law code into the stone, and he gives it to Moses. He gives it to the people. And there's 613, I think, commandments that he writes in. There's just the first 10. We still got over 500 to go, 600 to go. So he does this, right? Yahweh writes his law code in stone, and then he gives it to his king, who then presents it to the people. He serves as this mediator between Yahweh and the land of Israel. This is what Shamash did with the Code of Hammurabi. The big stone that's in the British Museum, the god Shamash, he took the stone, he was up on this mountain, and he wrote the law code down, and he gave it to Hammurabi. And this stone that probably weighs a couple thousand pounds, Hammurabi, this dude was a Hulk. He just carried it down the mountain and he presented it to the people, and they read it in the land, every year. And this was actually displayed in cities throughout the Babylonian Empire. Because, unlike here in the States where you can be breaking the law and have no idea because, it's buried under 86,000 pages of, laws.
A damn show.
The whole thing is displayed prominently, carved in stone in the middle of town in every major city across the empire. That's how they did it. What happens if I, trip over my neighbor's cow and break my leg? Oh, let me just go consult the law code. It's right here. And there's no guesswork. It's right there. And so this is what we're seeing here. It's their version of Shamash giving the law code to Hammurabi. There's a lot of similarities between Moses and Hammurabi. Hammurabi is one of the people that Moses is based on. And so Shamash has now become Yahweh. Hammurabi has now become Moses. And his law code, which is where we get eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, has become the 600 and however many commandments issued by Yahweh. So that's what we're getting into now. The law code of Shamash. I mean Yahweh.
Which, and it's interesting because I do remember sometime during the reign of King Solomon, he builds a temple to Shamash that King Josiah later has to come and destroy. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading that stuff earlier, thinking like, what in the world is happening here? But Solomon, people tend to have a love-hate relationship with Solomon in the same way they do with Joseph. They both seem to suffer the same sin of diversity.
Yeah. Only Solomon took his diversity to extremes. I mean, the dude had like 1,000 women.
Oh man.
One of every
like
color and
wives
size and
300
shape.
concubines.
Yeah. He's like, you know what? I don't think I have any chicks that have shaved the left side of their head. Let me go find one. Like, he had one of everything. Okay,
it's unbelievable.
Yeah. But oddly enough, no one Yahweh wasn't mad at him for that.
Right.
He was only mad that some of those women wanted to worship their own gods.
Yep.
Having 1,000 of them was totally fine.
Yeah.
So,
God is down with the bitches. That's how I'll put that.
Yeah. Which is something we're going to get into as a little teaser for people to get you to tune in next time. So, pretty soon we're going to learn the proper way to abuse your slaves. You've got to have that to be a good, upright moral society. You have to learn how to treat your slaves, how to sell your children into slavery and things like that. You don't want to do it wrong and be a bad person. Okay.
Right.
You also have to, we're also going to get into some time travel. Moses is going to go on a time travel journey in the next few chapters. That's going to be pretty cool.
Snap.
You're like, wait, what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Moses is going time traveling. He's going to pull a Bill and Ted here in a minute. So, we've got that coming up. Let's see. What else do we have? We've got some Canaanite rituals that are going to be coming up. Let me think. There's a command for child sacrifice. We can't forget that. There was a really good one I was thinking of, and now I can't remember it.
Oh man,
I don't know, but yeah, there's some fun stuff coming up. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun ones. So yeah, you definitely got to tune in next time, because even though the book should have ended, it hasn't. And
oh man, now it reminds me of Star Wars. Exodus is like Star Wars. It should have ended, but it hasn't, and somehow Palpatine came back, and the rest of us are pissed off.
Right? Yeah. So we're going to learn all about the ancient blood magic.
Man,
it's pretty gruesome stuff. There's a second set of 10 commandments that he's going to get.
Yes.
And it says, and he wrote the same 10 commandments, and then it's completely different. Like 3 of them are the same or something like that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's fun.
Oh man.
Yeah, we got some good ones coming up.
This is exciting. I know the teaser wasn't for me, but damn, I'm excited about what's to come, because this has been so great so far. As we're wrapping up our conclusion, as become somewhat tradition around here for the book of Exodus, I'm going to drop off the screen and allow Jason just to have 5 or 10 minutes to, well, you know, that's a long time, but still 5 to 10 minutes just to say whatever the fuck he wants to say to support his stuff. Please feel free to promote everything you got going on, man. We're family here. As I told you from day one, you're not a special host, you're co-host. You're here. And so I'm going to drop off the screen. Have your way, man. I'll pop back up at the end.
All right. So as some of you who've been following my show for a while may have heard, I'm currently reworking all of the Genesis episodes. These are the first 14 episodes of my show. The first one, that's sort of like an introduction, and it outlines how we're going to study the Bible. That episode has already dropped. I'm merely replacing the original audio, so it won't show up as a new episode. You'll just go back to the original and listen to it again, and it'll have brand new audio. What's coming up is a more in-depth discussion of the 6-day creation, the Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel, things like that. Lots of new material as I've done even more research, dug a lot deeper, and found lots of really cool tidbits, like the story of Cain and Abel and how it's inspired by a story of Tammuz and Inanna, and how Cain used to be a corn god. And so there's all kind of stuff like that. And then, of course, we're getting into things like I think 4 different stories concerning Noah's flood. Plus, and that's just the stories that the Hebrews had. So the 2 that are included in Genesis, but also some others, including one from the book of Enoch. And that one has Noah actually like glowing and levitating, so that's pretty cool. And then we're also gonna get into some other cool stuff, like where the story of Noah came from and all the different variants of the flood stories, going all the way back to about, I think, 2900 BCE, when a small city on the banks of the Euphrates River was flooded, and it inspired all of these different tales, and how a Canaanite story ended up getting wrapped up into this and provided an important detail that wouldn't have otherwise been in any of these stories. After that, we're going to move on to the Tower of Babel and how that is in some ways a retelling of Noah's flood, with a lot of really interesting parallels that you've probably never heard before. And I know this because I dug deep looking for these things, and despite the fact that I already had these parallels, I couldn't find any scholarly sources that outlined them. So you've probably never heard of them. Then we'll be going right into the story of Abraham and, you know, all the other patriarchs, including a really cool tale where Esau gets in a fight with Nimrod, and why he ends up selling his birthright to Jacob. This really cool alternate myth that isn't included in Genesis, but was preserved in other Jewish sources. And then, of course, we'll be wrapping up with the story of Joseph and how he's essentially the prototype for Jesus. So, that's what I got coming up on my show in the coming months. And after that, we'll be taking a deep dive into the Gospel of Mark, our oldest gospel, and how every single scene of it can be traced to older stories. And none of it has anything to do with a Jewish carpenter, but has a great deal to do with a Greek hero that you've undoubtedly heard of. And he now has a minivan named after him.
Ooh. Okay, so this is going to be interesting.
Yeah. There's the Gospel of Mark has more information about Odysseus than Jesus. Assuming there was a historical Jesus, there's more about Odysseus in there than about any Jewish carpenter.
And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Mark the oldest gospel or the oldest one that we have?
Mark is ground zero for all biographical material concerning Jesus. We don't have anything older than that survives. Everything else, everything basically comes from Mark, and Mark is talking about Odysseus for a great deal of it.
Oh, that is good, because Mark actually is one of my favorite apostles, even as a deconvert. Studying those writings and the history attached to this character is very, very interesting.
The literature of Mark is so complex, and that's one of the things that's why I pushed it back and decided to go back and redo Genesis, is because I needed to buy more time, because the literature in Mark is so complex. Teasing it all apart is extremely difficult, and I want to do it right. I want to do it justice, because like if you just read it, oh, this is a cool story, but then when you actually look at it, if you start to research it, and you start to look at it, and you realize that whoever wrote Mark, and we have no idea who it wasn't originally called the Gospel of Mark. It was
for sure
called like the Gospel of Jesus Christ or something like that. Anyway, this gospel, it is so complex that the author had to have used more paper outlining it than he actually used writing it. It is that complicated. The entire thing is actually set up in this very weird pattern where a scene at the beginning matches a scene at the end. And then the next scene matches a scene just before it. It's called a chiastic structure. And I think there's like 12 or 13 of them or something like that. And so you have this bizarre sort of symmetry between, like, as it's building up through the narrative, you can match a beginning with the end, and then a second scene to second to the last, and third to last, and so on and so forth, all the way through the thing. It is amazingly complex, and there are just so many different layers to this story. The person who wrote it, and he writes it like it uses like very simple language, but the author of Mark is like Mark Twain, a brilliant author who wrote something that anyone can read, but you can go in and start to dissect it. The man was a genius. It is some of the best literature from the entirety of the ancient world, and most people don't realize it because it's written to appear very simple. But there's layer upon layer upon layer. And I've been working on dissecting this thing for a couple of years now. I almost touched on it back in like episode 60 or something like that. And it turns out it's going to be like episode 100. So yeah, it's a crazy complex story. And then once I'm done, I've got like, I think 4 different endings that got added onto it later that I also have to cover. So,
man, this is great. So y'all have heard that, and I'm gonna throw up Norbert's comment just because I have to ditto this. He says, "Man, Jason, you should be a real theological professor," and that's just the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And the good news is that's exactly what Jason is. And so, if you do not have the links for his channel, I do have them included in the descriptions. For the entire month of Exodus, any video you're watching, you're going to see Jason's links and information in the descriptions, because I want you to go support that channel and get that type of information, because this is good information. All right, so we are at our 2 hours mark, a little bit past, which means we had one hell of a good time tonight. I'm going to go ahead and send you back to the backstage. Jason, thank you so much for hanging with us. Yeah. I'm going to send you back to the backstage, and I'm going to close this thing out. Absolutely, man. All right, y'all. For those of you who are left, I hope you have enjoyed the hell out of this, because I have. These conversations are immensely valuable because they, in many ways, they give us a way of actually appreciating these stories and what they may have represented for the people who wanted to use them, right? And of course, that's what we see. We're learning a lot. And the beautiful thing is, even though we're in the book of Exodus, we're not just learning about the book of Exodus. Tonight, we've talked about Leviticus, we've talked about Numbers, we've talked about Deuteronomy, we've talked about Judges, we've talked about Chronicles, and we just got finished talking about Mark, and there's just so much to explore here. And then even as far as other religions, we've talked, or other mythologies, we've talked about Shamash, we've talked about Baal. There was another one that was running through my mind that we talked about, because I know that we talked about, Dionysus, and now we've talked about Odysseus. I hope I'm saying that right. So you see the intersectionality, the interplay of all of these different stories. But then I often like to remind people that even the very concept of the gospel doesn't have its origins in Christianity, though it does have its origins in the language that is written, that the New Testament is written in, and that's Greek, but more specifically Greco-Roman. The gospel itself predates Christianity as a word that means a sacrifice for good news. You know what I'm saying? So the gospel isn't actually that Jesus came to bring the good news. The gospel is that Jesus is the sacrifice, and that's the good news. That's how gospel works. But that's a whole nother other story. I hope y'all are enjoying this. I see Carrie in here. She said she very much enjoyed it, and I believe it. Muttley's in here. Man, see you all next week or Sunday. Love and sausages. That's becoming one of my favorite things. I kind of want sausages now. Muttley, I don't know if y'all have Kaneka sausages across the pond, but you're going to want to look that up and order some of those, because they are amazing. Listen, thank you all for hanging with us tonight. These are always incredible to me, because not only do I get to share a lot, but having a co-host on, I get to learn a lot as well, and learn with you all. And it also gives me time to actually spend time in the comments, excuse me, to spend time in the comments, which I really enjoy the engagement that we have there. But I think that's about all. Please be here next week. We're going to keep going. As you see, Jason has already dropped in some incredible teasers. But not only that, which was a Dr. King thing he would always say, not only that in his speeches, but not only that, we have a list of exciting things coming up. I think this weekend, this Saturday, is another game night on our Discord. So if you're interested, please join our Discord. And then also we have Sunday sessions coming up. We're closing out our trust issues series of conversations, which have been absolutely amazing. I do have a few books. Check those out. Christ Held Up, Memphis. It's a novel. If you're looking for atheist content, you're not going to find it in Memphis. There's some pornographic content in there. So if you're just trying to get a nut, then there may be some good chapters in there for that. But other than that, it is one hell of a story, and I'm working on part 2 now. Also, my wife, she writes poetry. I can't get my thumb right, man. There it is. My wife, she has a book out on poetry, Words of a Shattered Mind, for those of you who are hopeless romantics and just love poetic language, such as we do. Hey, check that out. And our names are unique enough where you can find us anywhere. Okay, so I think that's all I have now. Okay, so now I got to put this up because Jason is back here in the chat, so I got to put this up. 100% of the people who wanted the wilderness for 40 years didn't hit the like button. So do that now so you don't get lost. That is fucking amazing. I love that. Like, listen, y'all, Jason and I didn't really know each other before this, but like, this is real support. And I appreciate having a friend like this and a brother like this in this space where we're out here co-laboring and doing the work together. That's amazing. And that is one thing that I have appreciated about the secular community, which y'all know I give my critiques every now and then. But what I do appreciate is that the people that I tend to find are people who are here to support other people. And that's just absolutely amazing. But that is all we have for the night. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the show. Please, if you haven't already, like the video, hit the alert notification bell. There's some other things that you should likely do. Oh, yeah. Consider joining, supporting, or connecting with this community, channel, or content in any way that makes sense to you. And last but not least, check out our merch because it is dope as fuck. We literally have a t-shirt and a hoodie that says Bible study with the next pastor, learn the Bible, laugh at the bullshit. And on the back of it, there's a barcode, like a QR code. So anybody who's curious about how to get to Bible study with an ex-pastor, they can just scan the back of your shirt without having to ask you what the fuck are you wearing and why the fuck are you wearing it. They can come straight here and find out from me. So thank y'all for hanging out. Listen, until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful if you can. I'll holler at you later. Have a great evening. Stay here. It's just some things, there's no going back. You know what I'm saying?
jwoodbeats.com. Yeah. I'm not the one with the issues. I hear you. Now here is your tissue. If I'm moving too fast, I might have to dismiss you. And it's really too bad, cause I really will miss you. But I'm not the one with the issues. I left him at church when I made it official. I murdered the curse with my own benediction. Left God in the dirt, call it death of the fiction. Superstition will be served in eviction. Competition will be left in the ditch. Oh my God, it's too damn hot in this kitchen. The fishes of men are now swimming with fishes. Oops, my bad, I guess I'm moving too vicious. Verses sold, I gotta put them on your wish list. Bless my soul, cause I'm dodging your little hit list. I guess you know, you just lost another witness.
Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go right now. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go. Gotta let me go, gotta let me go, gotta let me go, I'm out of here. I can do anything, fuck your opinions and energy. I finally got the epitome. My biggest hindrance was God can't do nothing but fail. Greater is me. I never needed your deity. All of this human capacity. When it gets rough, I can pick myself up and prevail. Cause I don't need anything other than people who fuck with me. Good business, it starts with good company. That's why your boy is a